Welcome everyone to the live panel discussion for finding credible information online with an emphasis on fibromyalgia. I'm Taryn May, HHP's online event coordinator, and I am your Zoom host for today. Since we have such a large audience, I've disabled everyone's microphones and videos until the Q&A session. Until that time, please put your questions in the chat, and we will be selecting some of those questions to ask the panelists during the Q&A. So I'll be monitoring that while the panelists are speaking. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel, and thank you so much for being here today. We have Lynn Matayana, a fibromyalgia patient who founded the National Fibromyalgia Association and is also the president and CEO of Community Health Focus, Inc. And she does a lot of patient advocacy work. Then we have Katarina Zulak, a health writer and fibromyalgia patient who owns the popular blog skillfullywell.com, which you should check out if you haven't already. And we also have Kelly Mitchell, a fibromyalgia patient and the community bridge builder for MindWise New Vision mental health charity in North Ireland. And moderating our panel is the founder of HHP, Dr. Phil Harrington. So Phil, I will hand it over to you until it's time for the Q&A.
That's great. Thank you so much, Taryn. And thanks everybody for coming on to the panel. And thank you so much to our panelists. Each panelist is going to speak for about 10 minutes, sharing their fibromyalgia story, you know, how they got their diagnosis, and then what they found out about how to best take care of themselves with fibromyalgia. Sharing that information with everybody here in the audience and people who will be watching the video of this in the future, which will be on the Human Health Project website. So we'll get started with Katarina. So Katarina, I'm going to hand over to you, and thank you again so much for sharing your experience.
Okay, thanks, Phil. My name is Katarina, and I've had fibromyalgia for about 10 years. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about my illness journey and then my experience finding the right information to help me manage living with fibro. So before my diagnosis, I was in graduate school and I wanted to have a career in global health, working on pandemic, not this pandemic, but HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment. The beginning of my fibromyalgia wasn't really dramatic. It just started with achy low back pain that got worse the longer I sat writing my term papers. I went to my GP and she told me the only thing she could do for pain was prescribe a muscle relaxant and some stretching exercises. So, spoiler alert, that didn't work. And over the next year, my body kind of gradually began to fall apart limb by limb. My neck and shoulders became so painful I couldn't type or pull the book to read. My back pain made sitting hard and I had to carry my backrest around with me everywhere on the bus and in campus. And my knee gave out and I finally wasn't really able to exercise at all. So this is when I started to consult Dr. Google about my symptoms. And I searched for everything: neck pain, back pain, insomnia, fatigue, etc. And I came across all kinds of sources, from books to the big health websites like WebMD, forums and social media and blogs. And one term that kept coming up was fibromyalgia. And the more I looked into it, the more I felt like it matched my symptoms. So I finally took that information to a doctor who was a little bit more sympathetic than my GP, my OB-GYN, and she made a referral to a pain clinic. It took me a really long time to get into the pain clinic, but when I finally did, they did diagnose me with fibromyalgia. And it was such a relief at the beginning just to have what I was going through validated. I was given access to some better medication. I was referred to a wonderful physiotherapist. And they also sent me to a mindfulness-based stress reduction course to relieve pain. But even with all of that, it felt like the pain and the fatigue kept winning. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to finish my degree. So I had tried everything from disability accommodations to taking fewer courses to buying a bunch of expensive ergonomic equipment and voice dictation software, but it just wasn't feasible. So I had to withdraw. And I was 25 and I was sort of standing on the edge of a cliff. Like my career was over before it had really begun, and I didn't know what to do with myself. So this was when I got really deep into my research phase. You'll commonly hear people say stuff like never Google your symptoms. But if you have to go from appointment to appointment over a period of years to find someone who will diagnose and treat you, you don't really have any other choice but to turn to Google. It helped me find the information that I needed to get my diagnosis. But the key is really that the information you need to find is credible and trustworthy. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think about finding credible information. So I think about it that there's sort of two groups of information. One group is medical knowledge that's based on research and clinical outcomes. And the other is patient expertise, or the lived experience that patients accumulate just by living day to day with their illness. So when I'm looking into medical information, I want it to always be referenced, reviewed, and reputable. So I'm just going to go through what that means for me. So referenced, of course, means that the author cites evidence to prove the claims that they're writing about. And the easiest way to check that is just to scroll to the bottom of the article, see if there's a reference section or bibliography. Beware of any articles that say things like, many people believe, or many studies show, but don't actually put any citations for that claim. The next thing you want is to make sure that the information itself has been reviewed. So as it was showing in the video, one of the ways to do that is to make sure it's citing academic or journal articles and studies. So that means that what they're publishing has been verified and scrutinized by other scientific experts. So that gives you a little bit more sense of credibility and trust in the information. And you also want to make sure that the source itself is reputable. And that generally means it has buy-in from patients, healthcare professionals, or researchers. So that often takes the form of nonprofit or patient advocacy groups, such as the Human Health Project or the National Fibromyalgia Association. And like sometimes this is one of the best sources to get helpful information. And once you've done your homework, you can take that information to have it inform your questions that you ask your doctor. You can share the research directly. Or if you find it's divergent between how you're being treated and what the information you're finding is saying that you should be treated, it might force you to go and get a second opinion. So, but I think for me, medical information is not really enough to learn to manage fibromyalgia. So valuable online health information also includes knowledge shared by people who live with chronic illness. And patient experts can provide advice, solutions, validation, support, and ideas for navigating day to day. This information is often found on blogs, some health-oriented websites, and occasionally also on social media. I think the health information shared by patients is particularly valuable for self-management strategies or coping with the mental and emotional challenges of living with illness. It can give you ideas about your own treatment and care, as well as improve your daily functioning and quality of life. So examples of topics could be how to do housework when you have back pain, or how to manage the summer heat, or make a flare-up self-care kit, or manage anxiety when you live with fibro, and what diets might be able to help with inflammation. So eventually my journey to researching fibro came full circle, and I started my own blog, Skillfully Well and Painfully Aware. And I also write for other health websites. So in my blogging, I try to put my sort of research and nerd skills to use by translating scientific information into usable knowledge that other people can put to use in their own life. So I'm interested especially in areas like mind-body medicine, such as meditation for managing your pain, or how to make healthy lifestyle choices, such as maybe mindful movement that you can actually do. I think it's also important to share the honest truth about the struggles of living mentally and emotionally with an illness. So I try to focus on topics like pushing yourself too much and perfectionism, or processing grief and acceptance over your illness. My goal as a writer is to really just share things that can help you navigate day to day. But patient expertise does have its limitations. It only ever applies to one person. And that's different from medical or scientific information that is tested using many participants and then is peer reviewed. So when you're reading something with patient expertise, just think that this is, one person's experience and may or may not be applicable to your situation. So finally, I want to talk about how to deal with misinformation. Misinformation, as we know, is everywhere these days. And the best way to avoid getting taken in is to be a critical reader. So here are some of my tips for how I try to approach that. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So any claim that the author has a cure for fibromyalgia or a secret nobody else knows about is an immediate red flag. We know, unfortunately, that fibromyalgia is not curable. Some people may have remission. And fibromyalgia is also unique to each patient. So there's no one size fits all cure. Secondly, consider whether the author has an agenda. So if the information is in service of some sort of marketing campaign, like they're selling a supplement or some sort of treatment service, then you should really look at that, take that with a big grain of salt. You need to corroborate that with scientific research. The other issue is if the author only ever cites their own research, then this is a red flag that maybe what they're writing is just, their agenda might just be self-promotion. And finally, I think unrealistic information that doesn't jive with your own experience should also be a red flag. So by now it should really be a scientific sort of fact that fibromyalgia is a real disease. But unfortunately, you will still come across some studies and authors who suggest that it's like a psychosomatic, all in your head condition. And I think that should be a red flag that it's misinformation, really. Another example, when I was first looking into fibromyalgia research, I found a lot of places saying that, moderate or intensive exercise like running is good for fibromyalgia. I don't know about you, but I personally cannot go running or hit the gym. So this is unrealistic. And I think if an article discredits your own lived experience, then it doesn't deserve your attention. So that's all for me. I guess I'll pass it back to Phil now.
Thank you so much, Katerina. That was wonderful to hear your story and your advice. What you found is your way of finding credible information online. I found that really valuable myself listening to you. Katerina is in Toronto in Canada. Our next panelist is in Belfast in Northern Ireland, Kelly Mitchell. So I'm going to hand over to you, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your learnings.
That's great, Phil. Thank you so much. You will have to excuse me because one of the symptoms I struggle with fibromyalgia is fibrofog. So I have had to type everything up so that I can remember what I'm talking about and I don't lose my train of thought. Before I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I had become a bit of a fitness fanatic, taking up cycling, spin classes, kettlebells, and running. So I'm comfortable saying that I was pretty fit. This was in 2013. However, roughly a year and a half after I commenced this new healthier lifestyle, I noticed that my hips became very sore after working out. This continued for a few months, and I shrugged it off initially, thinking I had pulled something until I started to experience pain in my feet and hands, roughly a year after the onset of the symptoms. I began having migraines and was eventually commenced on propranolol. Then I began to experience a number of different symptoms, including low mood, chronic fatigue, consistent pain throughout my body, and IBS type symptoms. But worse was the pain, pins and needles, and numbness in my hands, causing me to drop things easily. I went to the doctor, who happened to be a locum standing in for my own GP, and described the pain I was experiencing. And it was then that it was waking me up at night also, especially the pain in my hands. The doctor was initially concerned that I had rheumatoid arthritis and made a referral to rheumatology at Antrim Hospital in Northern Ireland, and made another appointment for me to see my own general practitioner to discuss pain medication, as it could be some time before I would get a rheumatology appointment. At this stage, it was mid-2014. After this appointment, I was commenced on naproxen, but this caused severe heartburn and was keeping me awake at night. Instead, they commenced me on tramadol for the pain. Then, as the illness progressed and began to interfere with my sleep and work life, I was commenced on amitriptyline at night time for the nerve pain and to help me sleep. But the pain and the fatigue continued to dominate my life, causing me to take long periods of sickness absence from work. But I started to realize that the stress of my work life was exacerbating my symptoms. At the time, I was working with people living with severe mental illness, working 13-hour shifts, including sleepovers in housing with people living with severe mental illness, along with other issues I have been having with that particular role. I continued to attend my GP on a regular basis. Eventually, she believed I had fibromyalgia and not rheumatoid arthritis due to the symptoms that were beginning to develop, and commenced me on medication to treat this, including gabapentin, increase in the tramadol, along with sertraline for depression, and then a omeprazole to counteract all the different medications that they were having, the impact that they were having, on my stomach. So by the time the year and a half came round and I attended my rheumatology appointment, it was 2016. They confirmed it was fibromyalgia. I was already feeling the full force of the symptoms. It became apparent to me as I began to learn more about my illness that stress seemed to be the trigger. Throughout this whole process, I started going through the self-pity stage of being diagnosed with such a debilitating illness. My social life became non-existent. I lost a few of my friends and I couldn't work. So instead, I ate to cope. I ate food to cope, with this, and slowly put on about 6 stone over that period of time. Eventually, I had to move to part-time hours without sleepovers initially, following assessment done by occupational health doctor I'd been referred to following my last bout of sickness absence from work. This was the turning point for me. I attended counselling through my workplace. It was here that I learned much more about myself and how the type of stress I was experiencing was exacerbating my symptoms of fibromyalgia. So began the small changes in my life. If something was stressing me out and making me unwell, I would look and see if I could do something differently to prevent or protect myself from this. I decided that the place I was working in was too toxic for my illness and transferred over to community floating support, working with clients in the community or in their homes who needed practical support with daily living tasks. This was a 9-to-5 job, and as it was only part-time, I only had to work Mondays, Tuesdays, and finished earlys on Wednesdays. I then focused on the things I could do rather than the things that I couldn't, and I began to pursue these. I began to teach myself how to needle felt, which is how I de-stress. And as time has gone on, I have been building these ethoses into my life, entertaining only what is positive in my life, but acknowledging and accepting when negative things happen in my life, but not allowing that to become the main focus, which is not dissimilar to how I help support the clients I work with who are living with mental illness. I joined some online support groups for fibromyalgia, both online and face-to-face, but I didn't find these helpful. I actually found that people would have gone on more just to talk about how they were feeling rather than coming on and being proactive to talk to each other about how do we get together and help prevent these things happening. So I started to learn to meditate using breathing techniques and distraction techniques. For instance, my hobbies. Although I have not been able to return to the level of fitness I did before, I've recently increased my walking and introduced walking groups in my work life and will continue to make changes slowly. I've tried herbal and natural remedies again, which I did not find useful. I was recently diagnosed with carpal tunnel syndrome and diabetes, which I take medication for. But I am hopeful that if I continue to work on myself, I may be able to reverse the diabetes. I am tablet dependent, and I am hoping to get a small operation to fix the carpal tunnel syndrome in my hands. I have been lucky enough to find a balance between my work life and home life. I have been able to return to work full time, and I am now a community bridge builder supporting clients with mental illness to re-engage in their local communities and to access groups and activities that are available to them. This is something I'm very passionate about because the people I work with, if in terms of recovery is not all about finding a magic cure. For me, recovery is about learning to live with my illness. And I am happy to share that although I have bad days, the good days outweigh the bad days. And I have only had a handful of small flare ups in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, in Northern Ireland, the support is very limited and it's only starting to be recognised as an invisible illness that is much in its infancy over here. A lot of the online support appears to be around American and Canadian medical support sites with very limited resources that are based within the UK. Thank you. I'll pass you back to Phil.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was wonderful to hear your story and your experience and what you found worked for you. I'm going to hand over now to Lynn, who's in Michigan in the US, to share her story with us and her experience. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you, Phil. First of all, I just want to say to Katie and Kelly, what an amazing job you did in sharing your stories and information. I know when I became ill back in 1995, there was absolutely no one who even knew the word fibromyalgia. And many of us were misdiagnosed. I was treated for over a year for lupus on all sorts of medications that were not helpful. I ended up spending 2 years in bed. I had a surgery for endometriosis. And many of these illnesses and things, many of you with fibromyalgia will recognize are illnesses that overlap. And sometimes it's hard to diagnose, as Kelly mentioned, because we do have symptoms of various illnesses, and sometimes we have them and sometimes we don't. So getting a diagnosis initially is one of the most important things and one of the most difficult things. And people oftentimes say to me, how do I find a doctor? And I always laugh because back in 95 through 97, I saw 37 doctors before I even heard the word fibromyalgia. So even though we still have much to do to be able to make sure that people are getting a correct diagnosis, that there are doctors who are educated, because unfortunately there are some out there who still don't believe, which is amazing considering the amount of research and the amount of knowledge we do have. But it's important that you do find out what is wrong with you if you do have fibromyalgia and if you do have these overlapping conditions, because many of those are things that you can get help for. And actually, if you improve, let's say you have migraine headaches and you become able to overcome those with medication and with self-management, then your fibromyalgia will probably get better as well. So getting the correct diagnosis is very, very important. The other important thing that I think is within yourself, there's two things you need to do. One is you need to change your expectations and your truths. Expectations are very difficult because when someone says to you, you need to exercise, and you think, well, I used to run, 4 miles or 2 miles or whatever, you think that's what you still should be able to do. So changing your expectations of yourself and realizing if you walk like me, when I was in bed, from my bed to my mailbox and back, I had accomplished something great. And I had to make sure that I gave myself that credit and didn't beat myself up for saying, well, I used to be able to do this. Doing it slowly, step by step, I got so I could walk across the street to the park. And then I eventually joined a mall walkers program and could walk in a circle around the mall. It takes time and it takes patience. But if you set your expectations to be realistic, that will help you in your journey. The other thing I mentioned is truth. We've talked a lot about misinformation and things like that. You have to have your own truth, because if you believe that you will never get better, if you believe that something that you've heard about that they said, oh, this is absolutely going to cure you, and you know deep down that it's not, or you know that the information that you're telling yourself is misinformation, again, you will not get better. And you have to find your own truth. Each one of us is very, very different. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a hard time finding healthcare providers to help us, because what might help me might not help you. So one of the things I always say is listen to yourself, listen to your body, listen to your heart, listen to your gut, and understand that if someone says, even in a peer-reviewed article, such and such exercise is good for you, if you try it and it's not helping you, then there's other things that you could do that probably will help improve you until the time where maybe then you can do exercise. So listen to yourself and believe in yourself. I think also a lot of people end up feeling very unworthy. You become less social, you become critical of yourself. And what I want everyone to know is that bad things happen to good people. I used to say, why did this happen to me? And what I hear from so many people, since I founded the National Fibromyalgia Association almost 24 years ago, I have spoken to thousands of patients, thousands of researchers, thousands of doctors. And what we always come up with is that we are of value, despite the fact that we have a very serious illness. And if you focus on that value and find ways to live your life so that you can accomplish things that you feel good about. And I don't mean you have to go out and do something crazy like me, like starting a whole nonprofit organization, but doing something like saying, I'm going to get up out of bed every morning and make sure that I am downstairs or in the kitchen with my children and give them a kiss and tell them I love them and say goodbye to them, so they don't picture me sitting in bed all day and worrying about me. That could be your purpose. And it might not be easy to do, but it's something then that you've taken the step to do something important for someone else. And when you do things for other people, it makes you feel good too. So there's so many things that we can do ourselves. One of the things that I've been really focusing on is what we can do in between doctor's appointments. I think a lot of us focus on, I've got to find the right doctor, I've got to find the right medication. What am I, me going to 37 doctors and not realizing that we ourselves have the power of choice. We have the power of being able to research and find things that are going to help us. And it's important that we take things one day at a time and that we recognize that this is a journey. This is something that you have to do day by day. Our symptoms wax and wane. But even though I've had fibromyalgia probably since I was in second grade, I've had times where I did end up in bed. But I've also had times where I traveled the world and got to speak about fibromyalgia to some people in Europe and people in South America and different places. And I was able to do that despite the fact that at one point my pain had been so bad I couldn't get up out of bed. So you have to know that there are different stages, different times. And like Katie said, there isn't a cure, but there are ways to get your life to have a quality and to be able to reduce that pain. And Kelly got back to work. So there's many of us that have found ways to be able to get our lives back. And what I want to see is everyone feeling like they have the life they deserve. So I want to share with you, check my time. I want to share with you a couple of things that are known facts that if you do these things, they probably will help you. So one is, like I said, make sure that when you have fibromyalgia, you could have overlapping conditions. Maybe don't focus so much on the fibromyalgia, but look at those other things where we do have more knowledge and more capability of treating and helping you. Carpal tunnel, migraine headache, irritable bowel, some of those things can have a lot of improvement based on healthcare providers giving that to you. Remember, self-care and lifestyle changes are important. That goes back to expectations. I was a dancer and I thought I'll never dance again. And then I did a water class where they had you doing water ballet, and I could do that. And so I found a way of changing my expectation of thinking, oh, I'll never do this again, to finding something that really did give me joy and pleasure. And it also helped me. It helped my body to not be so stiff, and again, helped improve my health. You have to let go. You have to let go of the fear. You have to let go of the thought that I will never do this again. I'll never do that again. People don't think I'm worth anything anymore because I'm not always able to do what I want to be able to do. Let go of those things and accept yourself, accept the illness, and accept the fact that things can change. Things always change. I had a doctor and I went to him and I said, am I ever going to get better? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, yes. And it was the first doctor who ever said that to me. And I said, I am? What do you mean? And he said, well, I'm going to help you and you're going to help yourself. And I promise you that if you do things that are, good for you and making you healthier, that you will improve. I can't promise you how much and I can't promise you how fast, but I can promise you, you will get better. And that gave me hope. That gave me that knowledge that I could eventually, slowly maybe, but through this journey that I would get better and I would find new things. One thing we just did for Awareness Day, we asked people to write stories about how they took a bad situation and turned it into a good one. And I got so many. We got hundreds of letters from people telling us their stories. And the thing that came out that I was so impressed with was they all said, I'm a better person now. And I think that's the thing that we have to remember. When you face challenges, when you face difficulty, you learn new things about yourself. People said they learned that they could be strong, that they could be compassionate. They learned how to think about other people's concerns and be there for them because they knew they wanted them to be there back for them when they needed them. So even though we all say we would never wish this on our worst enemy, there are things that can very much come out of this and be very positive. Set boundaries. Be true to yourself. If people ask you to do things and you can't do them, do not feel guilty when you have to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Because it's important that you don't push yourself beyond what you can do in that moment. Doesn't mean that you won't be able to do it at another moment, but set boundaries and be true to yourself as far as what's going to help you. Stay social, stay connected. One of the things when I first started the NFA, there were a lot of patient groups, but most of them were kind of whining and complaining. So stay positive and share with one another the good things you've learned and the good things that you have come to understand. And also be social with people who aren't sick. You don't want to talk about your pain all the time. You don't want to think about the negative. You want to find other things to be distractions. One of the best things to help with pain is distraction. So make sure you stay social and make sure you stay around people who are supportive and are understanding. I lost a lot of friends and that was very hard, but it's so important to not, as Kelly said, have toxic people in your life. You have to have those people who really do care about you and understand. And sometimes it takes some communication to make that happen. But don't be afraid to let go of people who aren't helping you and are not believing in you. And that includes doctors. Do not stay with a doctor who is not being beneficial to you or compassionate to you. You have choices. You can take a positive, you can decide to be positive. You can say, I am of value. I am a person that is, sick, but that doesn't mean that I don't have other things that are very important that I can contribute. And finally, know that there are a lot of people out there who are working very hard to help you. I think most people don't know that, but last year and this year, the NFA has worked with over 20 different researchers and completing research to find new ways of helping patients, understanding the condition better, helping to be able to educate doctors. And when the NFA started working, not just with the patients, but saying to the doctors and the researchers, you can learn from us, that changed everything. And I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of the NFA doing, is making sure that the patient is being heard. And so for those of you out there, when you find somebody that's asking you to do a survey or something, or be part of research, if you are able, please do that, because we really are trying to make advances and there are new things that we're finding out. So stay hopeful and stay positive. And I, again, appreciate all of you listening, and I hope that this was helpful. Thank you, Phil.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lynn. That was amazing. Your experience that you shared there with us. One thing that occurs to me to share with you is my own founding of Human Health Project came from being ill myself, and what you were sharing there, Lynn, and also Katerina and Kelly, resonated very strongly with me. I was remembering, oh yeah, this is why I started Human Health Project. What I'd also like to share, tied into what you guys spoke about, is that one thing is that um, speaking about patient experience or individual people's experience, we are providing a way to allow people to share that information with each other through the Human Health Project Real World Data Program. We have on our website at the moment, we have the results of our migraine and lupus surveys, which over 13,000 people in total took. There are 50 pages of reports. If you go onto the humanhealthproject.org website and you click on what we do and then real world data, you will read about that. Also, as well, we have already prepared the survey on fibromyalgia and on chronic fatigue syndrome, two conditions that are, I know people on this listening here, and these panelists, are connected invisible illnesses, as they call them. So we have those conditions pre-prepared, and we will be launching them as conditions on our real world data, conditions in the coming year or so. In parallel with that as well, just to say that the video that we saw at the beginning of the panel, Finding Credible Information Online, is one of the modules of a 3-module course, which is called Patient-Driven Diagnosis, the New Trailblazers in Health Research, again resonating very much with the experience of the panelists. So keep an eye out for that course coming from Human Health Project. It's our first online course. We already have courses with partners, but this is the first time now we have a Learning Academy, Human Health Project Learning Academy course, and it has 3 modules in it, one of them being the module Finding Credible Information Online. The other module is Real World Data, and the other module is What's Wrong with Me, which looks at finding a diagnosis. So thank you again so much, guys, for coming on and sharing your experience. I'm very, very grateful, and very grateful as well to Taryn for putting the panel together putting all of this together, doing an amazing job of leading the online events for Human Health Project. Human Health Project is a volunteer-based organization. We are, trying to build up a core staff, but also we have over 100 volunteers working from all over the world on the Human Health Project. Our mission is promoting peer-to-peer healthcare. So I'll hand back to Taryn now to take the lead on the Q&A. Thank you again, guys, so much.
Thank you.
Are you there, Taryn? Are you on mute? Okay, now I'm not sure what's happened to Taryn there, maybe if she's lost her connection. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here through the questions that
I think she's
people...
there now.
Oh, are you there, Taryn?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
I don't know what happened. It just shut down on me.
no problem at all. Off you go. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So have you guys covered any questions yet?
No, I was just looking through the chat for questions. So perfect timing.
Great. Okay. Well, Katerina, I think that I'm actually going to direct this to you, this first question, because you have a blog. Linda is asking about seeing a lot of personal websites. I think she might be talking about blogs who are selling their own products and how that might affect the way that you would judge the information that you're getting from that blog or that website. Katerina, does that have any effect for how you interpret that information if someone is also selling a treatment product?
Yeah, it's pretty common for bloggers to have affiliate links or do product reviews. And I mean, I think normally in that process, the blogger is sort of told that, if they didn't like the product, then they won't write a review, even if they've tried it. So I think most bloggers try to have a certain amount of integrity around that. But what I would definitely say is, if you find a blog that suggests something and you're interested in it, but you see it's an affiliate link to somewhere where you can purchase the product, or they're selling their own product, then you really want to corroborate that with another source. So maybe take that information as like an entry point into another Google search where you can hopefully find an academic study or more of a non-biased resource saying, if someone is selling like magnesium supplements, then you can definitely find other articles that will verify that magnesium is helpful for some people, that and that, so then you can feel a bit more confident in it. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we had another question that I thought was good for the entire group. So I'll just posit this to all of our panelists, whoever wants to share. But Leona is asking, if there is no cure, why does she read so much about all of these diets that if you follow them, it basically cures you? Do any of you guys have any opinions on kind of the credibility of that information when you come across it online?
It's like we were talking about before when we were explaining our own stories. Not everybody is going to be able to have the same symptoms. So not everybody is going to be able to use the same treatments. So it is really about trying to find what works for you and your symptoms that will help you to manage them.
I would just add to that is that certain things are going to make you better. And as I mentioned, this waxes and wanes. And in the beginning, small things may make a small difference. And then later on, a small thing may make a bigger difference. And I think that the three of us all show that there are different things, maybe not necessarily diet, although nutrition is a very important part of becoming healthier. And if you think about this as becoming healthier, what are the things I can do that will make me healthier? And those are things: improving your sleep, improving your nutrition, improving the amount of activity, improving your mental thoughts and doing meditation and things like that, that you can improve your overall health. So when they say cure, I think Katie said this too, beware, because we do have an illness, our brains function differently. And it just depends on how much of, the waxing and waning you're going through as to what you need to do. So I know at times I can eat sugar and at times it just knocks me out. So I know then, okay, it's time to stop doing that for a while. But the cure idea is don't focus so much on cure, focus on getting better, because that is a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an article about doing research into some diets for fibromyalgia, and there are definitely some small studies with associations between, I think, vegan or vegetarian diet seem to improve for some people, a Mediterranean diet, because it helps reduce inflammation. But I think it's a paradigm shift. Instead of going to, I'm going to get back to my old self or be cured completely, then these are just an incremental step. And for some people, the diet may dramatically improve their symptoms, and for other people, it might just be, like Lynn said, a small change. So it's, and of course, it's different people will have different results to different diets because it's very individual. So I think, you'll be wary if someone says it will cure you. It's great if one person out there tried a new diet and went into remission, but that's not really the normal course of events. Usually it's more like a step-by-step thing.
Okay, great. Thank you to all of you for answering that. There have been a couple of conversations in the chat that I think we can talk about without getting into like specific medical advice, because obviously we don't want to do that in this kind of forum. But there has been a conversation just a few moments ago between Joanne and Anna about a fibromyalgia test. If there's a test available that can definitively give you that diagnosis, maybe it has to do with a blood draw. And then Anna was also having a conversation with someone in the chat earlier about something called the SHINE treatment protocol. So I was wondering if any of you panelists have any experiences with either the fibromyalgia test or this SHINE treatment protocol, which I guess tries to find the more individual causes and treat kind of the maybe not smaller symptoms. But do any of you guys have anything you want to jump in on either of those topics?
I can speak to the blood test. The National Fibromyalgia Association has over 70 researchers and healthcare providers who specialize in fibromyalgia that we use to help us in determining, vetting products and vetting services and information. So far, it's interesting because the blood test has been approved by Social Security to be paid for, through the Medicare system for people. And so that gave it credibility. I think that sometimes there's such a desire for something that things are accepted and maybe even pushed forward when they really don't have the credibility. As far as the healthcare providers and the researchers that I've talked to, they have felt that the blood test was really not a definitive way of finding out if you have fibromyalgia. And for those people who aren't covered by insurance, it could possibly cost them money. I think that one of the things that we've really struggled with in the beginning when they used to have the tender point exam, there were all of these things that we thought could help define, because the medical world wants to be able to define it. If you sit in a group of people with 5 or 6 people with the same symptoms and they're all saying the same thing, it's pretty easy to just tell yourself, hey, this looks like this is what I have. And fibromyalgia is a disease of exclusion, and it does overlap with many other illnesses. So, and even things like rheumatoid arthritis, and like I was diagnosed with lupus because the test came back positive, But in the end, I didn't have lupus. Those tests changed within a matter of 6 months or so. So diagnosis is a very, very complicated thing. And, if someone wants to have the test and they can afford it, and it might help them just feel like they've done something, that's up to them. But from my experience and my knowledge, it really isn't an effective way to diagnose a person with fibromyalgia.
Okay, Kelly or Katarina, do either of you have any thoughts on that, or maybe thoughts on this SHINE treatment protocol?
I'm not sure about the Shine. I haven't heard of it, but I know over here in Northern Ireland, we don't have a specific blood test to test for fibromyalgia. That's why it took from 2013 right the way through to 2016 for me to be diagnosed as such, because they had to go through series of blood tests to rule out everything else before they could give me the specific diagnosis.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience in Canada. The blood test is not paid for by the Medicare system here, so it's more on the basis of like symptomology, and they sort of use this thing about if you have chronic, widespread pain, sleep problems, they have you have two of the following three things, in different categories that you will get the diagnosis. So it's not something I'm that familiar with.
And one thing I do want to mention is that there are many, many illnesses that do not have a diagnostic criteria or a specific test. And so it's not that just fibromyalgia doesn't have it. It's the medical world hasn't always been able to come up with something specific. And if you look at many, many illnesses, there isn't a definitive test for it. So, but that doesn't mean it's not real, and it doesn't mean that the person isn't experiencing those symptoms and problems. So it would be nice to have something more tangible, but don't feel like the fibromyalgia world is being, ignored because we don't have a specific blood test or something like that, because many, many illnesses don't.
Okay, great. Thank you guys very much. It is, we're at the hour now. We do have one more question. Do you guys have time for an additional question or more questions, or should we wrap it up? Okay, great. I'll just leave it with Anna is asking if any of the panelists had the causes of their fibromyalgia determined. Something you guys want to talk about or no?
I can actually say no, I haven't. They can't give me a definitive answer because so many things have happened throughout my life, both negative and positive, and any one of those things could have either caused it or could have attributed to the reasons as to why the fibromyalgia developed for myself.
I pretty much do know because I was dealing with infertility. I had endometriosis. Many, the majority of people with fibromyalgia are women, and many of them do have, terrible periods and chronic pelvic pain and these types of things. I had endometriosis. I went in for a laparoscopy to laser the endometriosis. Well, with fibromyalgia being a neurological problem and you have a laser that is lasering all of those nerve endings, within 24 hours, I had all of the symptoms of fibromyalgia. And that was kind of the beginning of, this problem. I continued to try to go through infertility, which is very difficult on your body, and I just kept getting worse and worse. So that was a turning point. Now, I mentioned before that I thought I had fibro from the time I was, very young. So I think, we do believe it's a genetic and passed on through families. So I could have had some of the predisposition for it, but then when I had the surgery and tried to go through the infertility, that's what kind of kicked it over to being so intense. And, a lot of the research does say that it's usually, long-term health issues or a physical trauma, an emotional trauma. These are the things oftentimes that can trigger the onset of fibromyalgia.
In my case, from the the doctors I've sort of talked to about it, one of the things is that a lot of people in my family do have they don't have fibromyalgia, but they have the overlapping conditions such as IBS, depression, and certain types of chronic pain. So I think that the idea is maybe that gave me a predisposition. And then in the few years before my diagnosis, I had done a lot of traveling, and I ended up getting a huge number of different infections. I had like mumps, malaria, various things. And I think once I started graduate school, like my body was probably already dealing with a lot from the infections. And I think you're seeing some of this with the idea that COVID is possibly, long hauler COVID is maybe triggering chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia type symptoms in some people. I think maybe the post sort of viral load and then just the sort of emotional stress of the course and other things piled on top was just more than my body could sort of handle. So I think that, but nobody said definitively, yeah, that's what caused it. But the idea of just, I think a lot of physical loads on your body, and then you combine that with something emotional, and it's sort of like, the flame, the match to the flame, sort of to the tinder. And I think that those are some of the common ones, like when you look back in your life. And even when I go back to childhood, like I had pain and things that other people didn't. So it does make me feel like that predisposition was probably already there.
Right. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate it. Phil, do you have any closing remarks?
Just to say thank you so much to you, Taryn, for putting all this together, and to our amazing speakers. I found it really illuminative myself listening to you, and I'm sure that all the audience here today did as well, and that the people who will go on to watch this video in the future, which will be on the Human Health Project's events page, will be able to also gain a lot of knowledge and encouragement to, not to give up on being able to make them, have a better life even with fibromyalgia. I think that's the big message that came across for me today, that it is possible actually to get to manage it and to have a good life. So thank you all so much for coming on. Thank you again, Taryn, and thanks everybody for coming onto Zoom to be part of this with us and for your questions.
Great. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.